Good morning. Today is the 27th day of Tishrei. It's the 12th of October. And we're up to the fifth reading of Bereishit, the first parsha in Genesis. And today's reading is relatively short. Only 4 verses. Kind of surprising in this very, very long parsha that there's a portion that only has 4 verses. But the reason that this is apparently separate from everything else is because it actually continues tomorrow, but there's something very important about this lineage, the lineage of Cain. Now, we don't hear all of it today because I guess it's in some ways it's almost too much to take in, but you have to really understand what's going on to understand that it's almost like you can't process all of it in one sitting. It seems very innocuous to begin with. So let's just read these 4 verses to get an idea. So Cain knew his wife. That was how we ended the previous portion. And he had a child, his name was Chanoch, and he was the first city builder. Cain was the first one to build a city, and he named the city after his son Chanoch. Then Chanoch had a son Irad, and Irad had Mechuyael had Metushael, and finally the 6th generation is Lemech. He's the 6th generation from Cain. It's confusing in the Torah, in the Bible in general, because there are 2 Lemechs, and they lived at the same time. One was the 6th generation from Cain, the other was the 9th generation from Abel. But they lived at the same time. Another thing that's very confusing about all of this is that Lemech from Cain's daughter, whose name was Naamah, married Lemech from Abel's son, whose name we all know, Noach. So here were Noach and Naamah, 2 names that also begin with a nun, with an N sound. Their fathers have the same name. One is from the lineage of Cain, who killed Abel. Sorry, I said that they were from Abel. Obviously, they're from Seth, not from Abel. Sorry. But the 9th generation from Adam. So we have somebody here who is the 6th generation from Adam and somebody who is the 9th generation from Adam. And they marry, and they actually become the couple who, according to the Torah, survive the flood. So this whole constellation is very, very strange. The whole thing is like, what's going on here? Why did the Seth lineage make peace with the Cain lineage? What's going on exactly? Lemech, so getting to our reading today, Lemech married 2 women. The name of the first was Ada. The name of the second was Tzila. And Ada gave birth to Yaval. He was a forerunner of all those who live in tents and keep herds. And his brother, so cities come from Cain. Domestication of animals comes from Cain. And then Tzila she also gave birth to a son, not just Ada, which is, we'll see in a moment, a trick that they played on Lemech. And Tuval Cain, who sharpened all copper and iron tools. So we're not talking here about cutlery, we're talking about weapons. So Cain gives birth to the origin of cities, the origin of domestication of animals, and the origin of weaponry. Tuval Cain's sister was Naamah, and that's the end of this portion. So what are we talking about here? What's going on? To begin to understand this whole story, we have to understand why the Torah mentions that he had 2 wives. A lot of people had 2 wives. He is just an example. He's an exemplar for what was going on. So Rashi says, And I'll read it from Vishnevsky's rendition of Rashi because it's very easy. By this time, society's mores, I'm not sure how you say that, had degenerated to the point that men were objectifying female beauty and depersonalizing women. So this is an amazing thing. What is he saying? He's saying, Rashi is telling us, that this was not the situation in the Garden of Eden, and it only became part of the situation after they were expelled from the Garden of Eden, when Adam blamed Eve for everything that they had done, which was not true. And slowly the status of women degenerated. So the scientific story is that somehow, because women have a different physique, they're weaker physically, so therefore they were always treated as, in a sense, serving the males. But this is not according to the Torah. The Torah says this is not the way it was. Rather, society degenerated. And it degenerated specifically, as the Torah here tells us, in the lineage of Cain. It's not that this wasn't true about Seth. It was also true. But the exemplar was Lamech. Lamech, the sixth generation from Cain. It became customary for a man to marry one woman solely for her beauty, consorting with her continuously, meaning that he's with her just for the companionship, the sexual side of things, and a second woman by whom he would have children, discharging his duty to procreate and then ignore. So all he did was he had relations with her in order to impregnate her. And that was it. The first wife would be given a contraceptive drug in order that pregnancy and childbearing not mar her beauty. So that's why Lamech had two wives. The first one, whose name was Ada, meaning removed. She was the wife designated solely for procreation and was removed from Lamech's daily company. He never saw her, only when he needed to procreate. That was it. The name of the second was Tzila, which means shadow, and she was a wife designated solely for carnal relations. So she accompanied him everywhere, and in this way was always in his shadow. They would call her the shadow. But you understand also that she's an object, that he uses her in the same way that he uses the other one. So this is the objectification of women. But we just said that how did suddenly Tzila have a son? So even though she took contraceptives, Tzila also gave birth to a son. And there's a whole story that the contraceptives that they had were not fully sterilizing. They weren't forever. They worked for a certain amount of time. And at some point she fooled him. Why? Because she wanted a son. And so she, as if, took it and didn't take it, and then she had a child. But amazingly, who was this child? The child of this relationship between Lamech and a wife that was designated only for beauty became the weapon maker. Right away you think of Helen of Troy. It's almost impossible not to. It's like wars are waged for the objectification of women. The incredible connection here is impossible to miss. So what is this all about? So in one of his classes, Rav Ginsburg says, well, this is a cautionary tale. It's telling you about the degeneration of society. How society degenerates. How do you get from making cities to war? How do you become from civilized, supposedly, to uncivilized? Well, it goes through the objectification of women. That's the middle stage. That's how you get there. And so he says this whole thing is telling us, beware. Beware, because this can happen everywhere. And the way that you know the level of society is by looking at those that society shuns, that society trods upon, that it objectifies them. It turns them into people who are not people, and that's how you can gauge where a society is at, and how much it might persevere or not. And in the end, that society was completely destroyed by the flood. And so this is a very, very deep thought. There's a lot to take in. There's a lot to think, and I think that's why there's only 4 verses here, because it's like a story of degeneration. Cain had a son. He built a city in his name. 4 generations later, there's someone who society has degenerated so much that women are objectified, and the result is, interestingly, domestication, which you can think about also. What does that mean? Is the use of women only for having offspring related to domestication of animals? Is there a connection between the two? And finally, the complete degeneration of leading to war, which passes through the objectification of women. So there's an incredible amount to think about here in these verses, and we'll leave it with a simple question that I've only come upon in the last few years. Who was the longest living person according to the Bible? And most people will probably correctly say Methuselah, because he lived 969 years. According to the Torah, that's how long he lived. But there's another individual whom the Torah doesn't tell us when he died, but it stands to reason that he passed away because of the flood and not because of, I don't know how to call it, old age. Who is this person? So between the lines, when you read between the lines, you understand that this person was Cain. Cain was never killed, he never died, but he didn't survive the flood. So if you do the math, Cain was something like 1650 years old when he passed away. So in that sense, he's the oldest living character in the Bible. But that's just something that we need to think about in terms of old age, and what does that mean, and how is it that particularly the offspring of Cain are the ones who bring about this degeneration. But again, it wasn't just Cain, but it did start with Cain, because murder is the first step. So he tries to make up for murder with building a city, with creating civilization. But when murder is the root of it, we see that it doesn't work. And 7 generations later, with his son Tuval Cain, who has the same name, which really means Tuval Cain. It's the same. It's like I lead Cain. That's like what his name means. He's like a repeat of his great great grandfather, and he creates weapons already. Cain didn't know how to kill Abel, so he used, the sages say, he used a rock, and he tried punching him in different places with a rock until he finally understood that the right place was in the head. And he finally understood it had something to do with breath, with the brain, all that. But his great-grandson already creates weapons of war, and that is the full degeneration of that lineage, which was then wiped out in the flood. It only remained to some degree through Naamah, the Lamech's daughter. That's a whole another discussion about what exactly she contributed and how she contributed and the relationship with Noach. I hope we're able to get to some of that maybe next week. So thank you for joining. Hope to see you later.